So now we come to the physiology part of our Everlast and also the gas exchange system, where we're going to look at this, how the gas exchange actually take place. Okay, so all this gas exchange will be passive process by means of the diffusion. Okay, so this surface is the biological barrier that form the boundary between the organism and the external environment. So in humans, this gas exchange surface is termed as the alveoli. So how does gas exchange take place? So question asks with reference to figure 7.16, explain how. So how mean process. Okay, how the differences in the partial pressure O2 and partial pressure CO2 in the alveolus and in the blood enable the gas exchange in the lung and respiratory tissues. So look at this diagram. So now look at this in the alveolus. So when ventilation, you take in the fresh air. So fresh air, you can see the partial pressure O2 is 13.87 kilopascal. Okay, and alveolus, because fresh air contains low partial pressure of CO2. Can I see that? So therefore, when the blood from the, this is a pulmonary vein. From pulmonary vein, can you see that? It's a pulmonary artery. So write down this pulmonary artery. So from pulmonary artery, the bloods now enter into the lung. So when enter into the capillary, can you see the blood, in the pulmonary artery, partial pressure of CO2 is high, 6.00 kilopascal. Partial pressure CO2 in the lung or alveolus is 5.33 kilopascal. So a gradient. So therefore, CO2 diffuse out of the capillary into the lung or into the alveolus. Okay, or vice versa, you can see that partial pressure O2 here is 13.87. Partial pressure O2 of the blood is 5.33. So steep partial pressure, a steep partial pressure O2 is created, the gradient. So therefore, O2 diffuse into the blood capillary. So therefore, enter to the lung through the pulmonary vein and then aorta. Okay. So now, if you compare between the arterial end and the venous end, you know that what actually happened, because partial pressure O2 13.33 now dropped to 5.33. 13.33 dropped to 5.33, so means that O2 actually diffuse out of the capillary into the body tissues. And you look at the partial pressure of CO2, 5.33 becomes 6. So therefore, CO2 actually diffuse from the respiratory tissues into the blood capillary. Okay, so how we write this? So a lung fresh air with high O2 partial pressure, which is 13.87, the blood brought to the lung 5.33. So that is a difference. Can I see that? So I show the difference. Therefore, we have the steep partial pressure O2 gradient result in the movement or diffusion of O2 from the alveolus into the red blood cell down the partial pressure gradient, and O2 can combine the hemoglobin to form oxyhemoglobin. Okay, and you can see that in the lung, CO2 partial pressure, in the blood is about 6 kilopascal, fresh air 5.33. So I show how the difference here. So again, steep partial pressure of a CO2 gradient, is corrected. So therefore, CO2 diffuse from the blood into the alveolus down the partial pressure gradient. So at respiratory tissues, you can see that respiratory tissue have low partial pressure O2. Therefore, the blood in the lungs, 13.33 kilopascal, steep partial pressure O2 gradients result O2 to diffuse from the red blood cells into the tissue fluids. Partial pressure of CO2 is high in the respiratory tissues while low in the blood. So therefore, a steep partial pressure of CO2 now cause CO2 to diffuse from the respiratory tissues to the blood down the partial pressure gradient. So I saw the differences in the partial pressure O2 and partial pressure of CO2. Okay, so you can take a photo if you need for this answer.